Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Good to be here. And I think Lux mentioned that he had the honor of being the one before lunch, and I think this time it's me. Uh, the only thing better about a session before lunch is at least it's not after when people are probably drowsy. So at least you're sure that people are awake. They might be awake because of hunger, but I'll assume it's because of hunger and thirst for knowledge. So good to be here. What I'll do today is I'll try and cover how are enterprises looking at Gen AI. Typically, what we do is we are focused on looking at Gen AI from the lens of a particular function or a particular silo. But today, when an organization or an enterprise is thinking of Gen AI, how do you get a overall view from a vantage point of a CEO or a CXO or a business leader, how it will impact your organization as a whole? So if you look at why I think everyone understands the market potential of Gen AI, 2022 somewhere around 30, 40 billion, expected to be about 300 billion by 26, 27. The estimates of it reaching trillion also by 2030. So the market potential is huge. And what makes Gen AI different is it is going to shift the power of analytical balance in an organization. If you look at the CEOs that we surveyed, 70% of 79, 80% of them think that Gen AI will increase the efficiency for the organization. At the same time, 50% of them have already started experimenting with Gen AI in their organizations. 50% of them also think that the growth opportunities, next growth opportunities for the organizations are coming from Gen AI. So there's a lot of buzz, and typically we've all seen the different types of technology revolutions which have come, where there's a hype curve, where initially there's a lot of enthusiasm about it, then it goes to a peak, then there's a level of disappointment, and then realization of what actually the technology can do and not do, and then finally there's a plateau. So if you look at Gen AI, it's typically nearing the peak of the buzz which is around it and the enthusiasm which is there in the market, typically maybe 2 to 5 years away from plateauing out, where market will realize what it can do better and for what it probably is not to be used. Looking at Gen AI, typically, what does it do? It basically generates content. I think all of us know it generates content. Second is, how does it do it? It uses foundation models for it, popularized by ChatGPT, but then yes, obviously GPT was the first model which was used, and there are other LLMs and foundation models available. There's a variety there in the market. Second is, then obviously applications are built on it, and it is used across. Now, if you look at today, what is the potential of Gen AI, right? So it is what it will do today, as of today. The initial drafts of things which is going out in the market, or if it is being used by people, the time for those kind of knowledge-intensive tasks are getting crunched substantially. So that's the value today, but obviously as we train the models, there's more foundation models get trained and customized, it'll reduce further. I think this is pretty self-explanatory if you move here. Now, where are organizations and enterprises today leveraging Gen AI, right? So one is the bucket which is all your back office, right, functions, which is to do with HR, finance, tax, which are not customer facing. A lot of enterprises are looking at experimenting with Gen AI in this bucket. It leads to efficiency gains, obviously, reducing the turnaround time and etc. And obviously cost reductions. So that's the sweet spot for starting for Gen AI for a lot of enterprises. Next bucket is your front office, everything to do with customer facing, which is your customer experience, sales teams, etc., which is some organizations have started experimenting there and looking at implementing models. These probably are organizations which are the early adopters of Gen AI, and they're comfortable using because they've customized a lot of their fine-tuned a lot of their models. Embedded, also in the market, you'll see most of the product suites which are there are getting Gen AI embedded in them. And so, Copilot is a classic example. You can look at all CRMs that are incubating Gen AI in them, which will change the way, so an organization does not have to worry about it, but the product itself will come embedded with Gen AI. And last is the IT or the software engineering. And this is probably something which impacts a lot of us in the room, traditionally technologists. There was a time when AI started, RPA started, and the auditors felt that it is something which will not impact them, because obviously audit knowledge is very sacrosanct, and the knowledge of gap, etc. But then there were things which change, and this is what is going to change for the software community. Today you have models which are writing codes. They may not be perfect, 60, 70% there, but a good starting point to really realize the efficiencies of using Gen AI. Now, if you look at different functions and the type of use cases that people are experimenting with, content summarization is the first one that generally organizations are picking, which is summarizing reports, annual reports, which goes for relationship managers as they're going out to talk to their clients, summarizing training manuals, summarizing policy documents. There's a discussion with, there's an FSI player which is looking at summarizing the RBI regulations which are there, which go to the branches, so that the new people can search easily as to what needs to be done in a certain scenario. They have a high attrition in the branches. So content summarization is a big thing which people are experimenting with. Content generation is another one use cases, where they're doing a lot of campaigns which are getting generated, both in terms of advertising and the visuals of it, as well as the campaigns with respect to the mailers which are going out to the clients. And a lot of clients have seen, organizations are seeing advantages of how they target millennials in terms of mailers based on the recommendations given by ChatGPT or Gen AI. Another area which people are looking at is experimenting with is more around synthetic data creation, which is typically very helpful when it comes to creating scenarios for UAT testing, etc., for different of their projects, which is also changing the game in terms of going to the market faster and getting testing done faster. If you see, finance as a domain here is one domain which requires a lot of regulatory oversights. It goes to SEBI, it goes to RBI and things like that. So finance as a function requires a large degree of accuracy. And the vision, so a lot of use cases that you see here written for finance are undergoing the first draft of check being done by the Gen AI, but not the final product. But this has the scope of doing a lot of fine tuning, and so things like investor reports before they go out, the regulatory reports which are going out. There is a vision in organizations to make it independent and make it automated using Gen AI, but we are not there yet. So this is one area which will see development as we go forward. Now, how should enterprises look at enabling the entire enterprise for Gen AI? Typically 6 broad areas that they should be looking at. One is developing AI strategy, which is in sync with their enterprise strategy, which is critical. Becoming familiar with the underlying technology, fast-moving technology landscape. Multidisciplinary team, which has to be there. I'll touch upon all of them in a little in detail. Leveraging use case validation and prioritization. What should you work on? What should you drop or do it later? Collection of proprietary data, which is very critical to make it relevant for your organization rather than using all generic stuff. And obviously access using ethical principles. Now, first one is syncing your Gen AI strategy, right? So, although there's a lot of buzz in the market, but you have to ensure that the organization strategy and your Gen AI strategy in sync. Most of the organizations or enterprises would have a AI strategy already in place. So you have to make sure that both the strategies are in place. A lot of conflicts in the organization when it comes to trying new technologies happens because of this not being there. If this is in place, and for this you need to take a lot of steps in terms of getting executive buy-ins from the CXO's office, making sure there are people, representatives across different functions and businesses who have bought into this. You also need to identify why you want to use Gen AI. So is the purpose for cost reduction or is the purpose for revenue growth to start with? So that you can clearly link in the outcome to what you're doing. And obviously you look at different facets of technology, data, process, people, which should be well drafted like a charter for the Gen AI strategy. Now, what you do is getting familiar with the technology is very important, not just for your tech force. So, I mean, we've seen a lot of change where organizations from doing traditional analytics move to AI. They had to train people on AI, deep learning stuff. But today, when it comes to getting them upskilled on Gen AI, it's not just Gen AI, right? Or it is not just those set of people who are technical. It's about your business folks. And more importantly, your CXOs and the business heads. Because what fundamentally is changing with Gen AI is, now going forward, the role of an analyst or a tech person who was the interface between the information and the consumption layer is going to go away or reduce substantially, which means your businesses should be able to gather and get the information without actually coding using Gen AI. So which means you need to train them about the impact. And that is why you see a lot of CXOs very interested, or a lot of business heads interested in this topic, because this is going to fundamentally change the way they work. And they have to use it. They're going to be the consumers of it. They're going to do it themselves. So that has to be in sync. And obviously a mechanism of tracking how the technology is changing. Another appreciation has to be there of the fact that the Gen AI solution will not be only foundation model when it goes into production. There's a huge element of getting your data first, as the previous speaker also spoke about. Second is about then AI ML is still there. It is still relevant in scenarios. So there'll be an element of AI ML in that solution. Then there'll be a foundation model there for the Gen AI, whether it is for consumption of information, summarizing or getting it out. And then you'll have the security layer, and then you'll have putting it in DevOps so that it runs like a machine. So a Gen AI solution will have all aspects, and the organization needs to have an understanding of that. And finally, few hard calls which the organization has to look at is whether they want to do it in-source or outsource, whether they want to go for cloud or on-prem. So for example, FSI clients typically, banks and all, are a little apprehensive about cloud, so they would prefer an on-prem solution than a cloud, or do it in a limited way in cloud. Earlier, there were concerns about security, but a lot of new models have come in where your tenant remains isolated from the model. It's not feeding in back to the foundation model. So we're making advances where the cloud LLMs are also pretty secure for use. If you look at multidisciplinary teams, right? Now in multidisciplinary teams, I think the key thing here is you need to make sure that this is the team which is going to drive for your enterprise, all right? So this is going to be the team which will get you the mandate and maneuver through all the politics and bureaucracy of your organization. So this has to be definitely read, has a representation from the CEO's office or the business leaders, functional leaders who should be there. Obviously you'll have the analytics, data science, data engineering folks, BIU heads who will be there. But an important person who needs to be there is the legal or the compliance people who should be there. Because what we've seen is a couple of clients, things are not moving because the legal person is not aware, not comfortable with the technology. So the sooner you get people of these different areas, so legal, risk, to be involved and educate them, because this is the team which needs to be very comfortable across each other working on a technology which will impact the entire value chain of your company. So this, a representation from all parts of the firm and education required for these firms, these people is very important. When you look at leveraging use cases, right? So now typically, once you've decided you have to go, you have a charter in place, you have the people, then how do you decide what use cases to work on? So there has to be different mechanism of evaluating use cases which are there. One is obviously you link to a business metric, and so you should be very clear of why you're doing a use case, what return will it give me. And if you look at the ease of implementation which is there and the benefit that you derive out of it, you can quickly find out things which are low-hanging fruits, right? So easy to implement, higher benefits. Things which are more strategic will be easy, difficult to implement but higher benefits, which are like long-term projects which need to be looked at. So that's one that you can look at. There's another way to look at it is by looking at the amount of manual effort which is currently happening in that process and how much of manual validation do you require. So, and based on which you can see, so for example, something similar, something like a simple drawing of an elephant is something which can be done very easily. Manual effort, everything manual can be automated. Validation, very easy. You can see it, and you know there's nothing needs to be changed. But something like looking at a legal document, and now looking at a legal document without any legal knowledge. So it is done manually today, so it's high on the manual effort. But without the knowledge of the domain, it's going to be very difficult to do. So it is something which will require a lot of manual validation. So it's high on effort as well as manual validation. So it is something which probably is not a priority. But if you get a legal expert into the room, and then you have a legal expert for validation, the validation becomes easier. So it might be high on the manual effort or intermediate on the manual effort, but with the legal validation expert in the room, it becomes a task which you can pick up. So you need to circle the areas where you think the effort is less in terms of manual validation, because the technology is too new for anyone to straight away start using for a end customer or a end regulator facing documents. But then once you identify the right team members for validation, have enough data sets for fine tuning your models, this is something which can be easily achieved. And I think ROI framework is something which every organization would need to have to see what is the impact of your use case in terms of hard-earned money, right? So is it a direct impact? Things like when you have reduction in the number of calls or reduction in number of people, it straight away impacts your bottom line, cost saving or revenue generation. Second is indirect impact that your projects have, right? So indirect impact would be something like reduction in average call times. You have reduction in churn rates, which indirectly impacts either one of the cost or the revenue levers. Then you have something which is looking at an alternate or an opportunity cost, which is the cost of looking at an alternate way of doing certain things, which is the opportunity cost that you would have. And finally, then there are things which are more around efficiency. So if you have if you increase the throughput with the same number of people, same assets, then that is an efficiency gain. So once in the beginning, when you're deciding the use cases for the organizations, you know how much of effort is required, you know how much of manual validation is required. Based on that, you prioritize and link it to a KPI, which is driven and which is monitored by the organization. That is how the Gen AI charter should look like, so that you can start executing cases for Gen AI. And this is predominantly very important for us to look at in terms of what is the data that is being used for. Today, most of the models are trained on public data. But the real power of Gen AI will come once the organization starts harnessing their own data. But that comes with a lot of challenges. First, you need to see where the data is. So a lot of structured data is already present or maybe present in data warehouses. Some of the organizations are on their journey for going towards a data lake or a data mesh. So they might have some unstructured data. But a lot of data is not saved in a public, in a central place in an organization. So this is the first thing that organizations need to do. Today, a lot of talk is about how accurately a model or an application is able to work. But a lot of effort at an enterprise level, we're talking of enterprises which are across regions, across sectors, right? Large-scale enterprises, they would have to first get their data in place. Second, then they need to see how do you structure this data so that it is easily referenceable. How can you search through the data better? Which means the way of storing data or using vectorized databases, etc., needs to be done to make it more accessible. And then how do you search better using, say, semantic search? So a lot of data plumbing needs to be done before organizations can start using their own data, which is your customized model. So for example, if you're trying to say a foundation model, you build a foundation model for a procurement department to write legal contracts for you for procurement. Now, there'll be a lot of nuances about your businesses, your terms and conditions, which a chat GPT, if you do it today, will not be able to capture. Only way to do it is feed it with your model, foundation model, and fine-tune it. Very few, obviously, other than Bloomberg, who's built their own foundation model, very few organizations are going for a customized foundation model. But their fine-tuning also requires a lot of data from your organization to go, understanding what would the cost implications of fine-tuning. So that is the paramount thing for an enterprise to use a model or build a model which can be sustainable for their needs and not a generic one. Which doesn't mean that you can't experiment with foundation models in other parts. So there are things like customer service. There are things like your conversations which are happening on the chat, etc. That can be done because a lot of generic knowledge is available for that. But yes, if you have to customize it, you have to get your data and make it accessible for your people. And then finally, it is to be done in an ethical way. So you need to have a very robust framework of looking at how a generative AI application model product should be made. And it has dimensions of looking at privacy. Obviously, with the coming of the data bill, privacy bill, obviously there's a protection bill. There's a lot of focus on it, and going forward, it will get stricter and stricter. So there should be clear accountability on who's responsible for what is coming out, is the data lineage of the foundation models captured properly. So there'll be a lot of focus on regulations. In fact, with the coming of the AI Act in EU, which also looks at dimensions like, is your AI model impacting any fundamental right of a human? So the level of scrutiny will even increase with the coming of more regulations in the market. So you need to have a robust framework which looks at privacy, which looks at rest of the elements of responsibility, it is fair, impartial, and these need to be documented, because tomorrow when the regulators come, they will need to see documentary evidences of how it was built, what data was it built, was the bias captured or tested initially or not. So those things need to be factored in when you're building a Gen AI capability or model. I think risk and limitations, if you look at enterprises are obviously aware of the risks and limitations which are there. Things like amplification of biases, the building checks and balances for it. Safe usage, obviously, there are certain areas only where it is being tested today. For example, shop floors, obviously you will not leave everything to Gen AI, but there are certain areas where you want it to have more freedom, which is about like stopping cyber attacks, etc., where it is given more freedom. Sovereignty is a big thing. The foundation model, there's more appreciation of the fact that just like most of the cloud providers have opened their data centers in India. Similarly, even the foundation models, no one today knows where the data is captured. So you would want localized data for foundation models as the industry matures. And lastly is, no one has certified any foundation models till today. So tomorrow there will be a scenario where they would want to know who's certified or what's the way of certifying foundation models. Then there'll be clear accountability, because if an organization is using a model which is not certified, then what is the implications of it? And so they've started taking some steps in this direction. So obviously, secure environments have been created in the organizations. Usage is restricted since it's a new technology, but this is obviously not the end state. The end state is when, so couple of years in our sense will be where this is getting set up, people are customizing it, it will be put at an enterprise scale. But the end state would be, the middle layer will not be there to act as a provider of information. The seeker will be the one who will be asking for information using these frameworks of Gen AI, and it will be directly provided to him in the best possible way, in most of the cases. So that is one thing which will happen. Enterprise data sets I spoke of. Audit trail is a big thing, because right now you need to show, if you want to use it in areas where, like finance I mentioned, where there's a regulatory oversight, there's regulation reports which are going out, you have to make sure that audit trail is there. So organizations are building audit trail in the Gen AI frameworks that they're setting up in their organization. And LLM ops is a reality, just like you have ML ops. Now the LLMs that we are creating should not be in a manual manner in terms of when you're going to put it in production. So this would be the focus of the organizations once you start generating your own LLMs for different purposes within the organization. I think this is pretty much the regular risk. Everyone's aware of hallucinations when something is wrong, the biases which are there, limited context window. So there are ways of overcoming it, but making people aware of the risks, and especially people higher up in the organization, is paramount, because they are the ones whose functions will directly get impacted by this, which impacts your bottom line. So I think I would probably end it there, but the key point here is we've seen the evolution of technology. I mean, artificial intelligence initially started in 1950s, the research and everything, right? Then we moved to ML, then it is down deep learning, and now Gen AI. A lot of people, I think, get confused in terms of thinking that Gen AI is like a silver bullet which will solve everything, which probably will get settled in a couple of years once we get mature at handling the technology. But I think the fact that generative AI will impact all of our businesses and all aspects of your functions is undeniable. It has a huge potential. It will disrupt the market in terms of make it more efficient and focus on, give people the time to focus on more specialized skills. So that is going to happen nevertheless, no matter what. Now, most of the organizations, the way they are experimenting with it is either the IT team is trying to experiment with it, or a couple of analytics folks, or one of the entrepreneurial functions has given responsibility to a couple of people to do it. But that will not yield the results for the entire enterprise in terms of moving the needle, which comes to bottom line or the top line. For that, you need the 6-step framework that I'm talking of, where at least take care of these 6 key areas to do it at an overall level. You will still have pockets which will do, There'll be functions who are better. There'll be functions who can probably are more entrepreneurial and can show results faster, but you have to have it in an organized way at a enterprise level. And lastly, Gen AI is not the only thing which will solve problems going forward. So your solution, some problems might be a simple RPA. Every problem might, anything with quantitative predictions, forecast will still there, so there'll be an element of ML. So Gen AI is just one more armor in your quiver in your armory, right? Just to say that you have one more thing which can probably make interactions, content generation, content summarization much better. But it is not going to replace the rest of the technologies. The organizations who would be successful in the future would be ones who can leverage all of them and know which tool or technology has to be used where. But yes, there's no denying the fact that Gen AI definitely is going to change the way we do business tomorrow. Thank you. Happy to take questions.
Hi, I'm Abhishek. Thank you for the talk. My question is, these Gen AI capabilities, they need a lot of fine-tuning and prompt engineering before you actually implement them for business use cases.
Can you be a little?
How can you think about the quality? How do you measure the quality of these output? Can you throw some light around that? Because they need a lot of fine-tuning and prompt engineering before you actually use them for a business use case. So any thoughts around measuring the quality of these output?
Yeah, I think that is where today a lot of manual validation is required, right, for quality. But it is a function of the data which is ingested. So today, a lot of it, you don't know what is the exact data that it was trained on. I think the quality improvements will come when you start fine-tuning with certain layers of the foundation models using your internal data. That's where the quality problem and the manual validation effort goes down.
Yeah, hi, thanks so much for the presentation. So my question is more specific on how are the regulators looking at Gen AI in terms of following the process, if at all, or is it still too early for regulators to start emphasizing and actually give even a cursory examination of what's going on in Gen AI?
Right. So in terms of regulators, I would say the European regulators are a little more in tune and maybe advanced in this respect. Because if you look at the AI Act, it includes Gen AI as also under its umbrella, so it's more elaborate. In terms of, if you look at the Indian market, I think there's no specific directions on using Gen AI as of today in terms of the regulation per se. But with the coming of the Data Protection Act, I think there soon will be a regulation, because if you look at the Indian market, most of the banks, etc., right? So right now they're in a journey of moving to cloud. And leveraging AI, the traditional NLP and ML techniques, right? Some time for them to graduate to Gen AI, and the regulators also to come out with guidelines.
But is it much riskier in terms of regulation when you're using Gen AI algorithms?
I think the main concern, not only with Gen AI, with AI, with the regulators have had is explainability, right? So yes, if you're not able to explain, because there's a lot of movement to change regulations from the way of how you do a thing versus the outcome-based regulations. So, but we are not there yet globally anywhere in terms of an outcome-based regulation. So it'll take some time. It's as risky as using an AI deep learning model for risk assessment. It's pretty much the same.
All right, thanks so much.
Sure. Yeah.
My question is, for any organization to start the journey on LLM, the first step is to allow the employees start using Gen AI. But most of the auditors, they have stopped the organization to allow Gen AI tools to be used because of some unknown risk which is there. So how, and what's your view about this aspect where the organization not even allowing the employees to use Gen AI?
Right. I think not giving employees the power to use Gen AI is not an answer, but doing it in a regulated way. And I think obviously some of it comes from using, creating awareness of the public foundation models versus private models versus enterprise models which are there, right? So a lot of it started when a lot of data from Samsung got uploaded on ChatGPT because of the employees. And that's why it's right for organizations to be wary of allowing everyone to use it, but in controlled environments, they are allowing people to use. Second is, the cloud providers have come out with their own foundation models. You have Bedrock, you have Palm from Google. So a lot of it can be used in a secure way for a limited set of people in the organizations. So it can be used. I think awareness is probably the issue. And but still, being a new technology, so for example, if auditors are not allowing, then it's your legal compliance which is not comfortable with it, right? So they need to be educated on and discussed of how it is safe and how the privacy of data is ensured. So that's probably what needs to be done.
Problem with me is somebody like Deloitte, a comparable company like Deloitte has suggested the compliance and legal head not to allow ChatGPT or generative AI in the organization, and the legal and compliance are of the view that they have stopped it because the auditors have stopped it. So is there any literature, anything or any model that has come up which could be suggested to the compliance and legal department, how and what are the safer way of allowing the employees to use ChatGPT and Gen
Sure.
AI?
As I said, there's a lot of literature around different types of models which can be used. We can probably take it offline and I can get in touch with you as to what is required and how do you ensure that the fears are allayed, right? So they can be, so even if you allow it, you'll allow it for certain scenarios, right? So based on the riskiness of the use case that you're trying to do. So there might be a case where someone is not allowing for a legitimate reason, but one has to get into the details to figure out what's the scene. Yeah? Yeah, please.
Hi. So my question is around the prompt engineering or the prompt craft part of the overall deal itself. And do you see that automation play a role within that part? And do you see that as a way to scale some of these initiatives at the, like you said, a lot of these are being run by entrepreneurial departments within different organizations. So what we're also seeing is that that aspect of prompt engineering and prompt craft and automating that can also help you scale. Are you seeing some of that with your clients?
So prompt engineering and prompt design is probably the easiest way of accessing it today, right? So it's so if anyone organizations, the way they are playing and they are experimenting is using prompt engineering, prompt design only. The problem is how do you educate people on, because same question asked differently gives you different results out of the LLM, right? So it's about how specific you can be and how in the back end what guardrails can you build so that you reduce the variability of the output which is coming out. So yes, people are using it. Automation in terms of the suggestions can come out. So for example, there have been cases where someone has asked for suggestions of what should the prompt be for DALI to get an output, and ChatGPT gives X, Y, Z prompts, and based on which, or betters your prompt so that you get a better picture out of DALI. So there'll be such conjunctions which will be used to refine your prompts. Cool. I think we're good. Anyone has questions? I'll probably take it after the session. No worries, we can take it on the side. Thank you so much, everyone, and please go for lunch.